Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of the Word of the Day podcast. My name is Jamie Silva. I am your host, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be back behind the mic, ready to pleasantly explain another useful word to you all. But before we do so, I want to read from an email we received not so long ago from alert listener Claire. It goes as follows, quote, I listened to the 100th episode on the word desuetude, and I was very disappointed to hear Latin be called a dead language. It is not so. In fact, if you combine the Vatican, and Jamie here, the Vatican is a tiny city-state in Rome where the Pope and lots of other Catholic bigwigs reside. Continuing. If you combine the Vatican and all of us Latin lovers, be they students, teachers, or enthusiasts, we could form a small country. Latin is still quite alive, and while it is not commonly used in conversation, it lives on in our own language, and is of course spotlighted in the spells of the greatest literary token known to man, the Harry Potter series. Upon hearing your dreadfully offensive statement, I felt pressed to ask for a word with Latin origins to be featured in a future episode. Unquote. Well, folks, I'm very glad Claire wrote us about this, and thank you, Claire, because I think she speaks for the great many fans of language who are also fans of Latin, and who take great umbrage, that's episode 40, by the way, those who take umbrage at its habitual dismissal as merely a dead language. I completely agree that this attitude is disrespectful, and if I'm feeling belligerent, downright ignorant. And as Claire points out, Latin is the foundation of so many English words, many of which we have featured and will continue to feature on this here podcast. And of course, it's the parent language of Spanish, French, Italian, Romanian, and many other so-called Romance languages. As a past student of Latin myself, I appreciate it to no end. And yet, technically speaking, it is still a dead language, as linguists would define it, since it isn't anyone's native language. Like, you can learn it, and lots of people, like Claire and myself, have done so to varying degrees, but you wouldn't grow up speaking it in your own household, as a way to conduct ordinary conversation. And that fact makes it a dead language. Now, one way a language can die is by gradually turning into another language, or languages, which, again, is what happened to Latin. That's why, as one quote I saw goes, Latin may be a dead language, but Latin never died. Quite the comforting paradox for Latin lovers, I should hope. Now, although Latin is a dead language, it is not extinct. An extinct language is one that has no speakers at all. No one speaks it as their native language, no one speaks it because they learned it in school, nothing. This doesn't necessarily mean it'll be gone forever. As long as people can still read it and pronounce it, theoretically it could become unextinct. And then, perhaps if those new learners taught it to their kids, it could become undead too. Not like undead as in a zombie language, but just linguistically alive. Something of this sort happened with the Hebrew language during the 20th century, and is happening today with Cornish, a language spoken by a small number of people in the southwestern tip of England. And for what it's worth, Claire tells me that her former Latin teacher taught her child, the Latin teacher's child, not Claire's. Claire does not have children, to be clear. Where was I? Yes. Claire's Latin teacher taught her child Latin before English. Imagine that. So maybe Latin is on the way back from the grave after all. Who knows? Anyway, to sum up, I want you all, particularly Claire, to know that we here at the Word of the Day podcast appreciate Latin profoundly, and we are very happy that folks, like Claire, keep Latin a dead language, not an extinct one. And as a token of our appreciation, and also just because we really like the concept, we will feature a bona fide Latin phrase as today's word. I mean, it's pretty darn close to an English word at this point, as people do use it occasionally in ordinary conversation, I think without realizing that it's actually Latin. It's effectively a loan word, or loan phrase, I guess, which we talked about in our episode on the French loanword banal. But Latin loanwords aren't nearly so prevalent as French ones, at least outside of the legal profession, where Latin terms and phrases are everywhere. There are a few in general usage, though. Here are some that Claire and I thought up: ad hoc, status quo, per se, verbatim, quid pro quo, caveat, de facto, etc., and vice versa. Okay, so it's now time to actually introduce the bona fide Latin phrase we're featuring today. As those of you who read the title of this episode before you started listening already know, that phrase is indeed bona fide. And as we prepared for this episode, I realized that we actually have so much to say about it because it's so interesting and so useful that we're going to split up our discussion of it into multiple episodes. Maybe 2, maybe 3, who knows? So, in Latin, bona fide literally translates to with good faith or in good faith. And perhaps because it comes from Latin, there's a few different ways to say it. I prefer bona fide, but there's also bona fide, bona fide, and bona fide. Now, in English, this phrase can be an adjective or a noun. Let's start with the former. As an adjective, I would say bona fide means genuine or authentic. And Google agrees. Their definition is, quote, genuine or real. So when I say bona fide is a bona fide Latin phrase, it means that's exactly what it is. It's not fake, it's not overhyped, it's the real deal. An honest to goodness ripped straight from that ancient language, probably spoken by Julius Caesar himself at some point, Latin term. And here's how you might hear it. I could say, after spending 2 years at mixology school, I'm a bona fide bartender at last, certificate and everything. What can I get you? Or perhaps one could say, this here seemingly ordinary fig tree actually grows bona fide datato figs, and was specially imported from the Calabria region of Italy, which is home to the world's finest figs. Now, in both of these cases, I'm asserting that whatever I'm describing as bona fide is genuinely, authentically what it claims to be, or what I'm presenting it as. There's no deception here, no fakery, no hornswaggling. Hornswaggling, by the way, is episode 17, and it means to cheat someone, especially in a business setting. And hornswaggling is actually quite apropos here because frequently the person trying to persuade you that something is a bona fide such and such is trying to sell it to you. You know, like, this baseball card is a bona fide Babe Ruth rookie card, meticulously authenticated by leading authenticators. Only 20 of its kind ever printed, it's 100% legit in mint condition, and for you, just $7,000. The possibility of being hornswoggled also looms large in one setting where bona fide enjoys regular usage, and that is in certain legal settings. For example, if you buy something from someone and it later turns out that they didn't own it and therefore didn't have the right to sell it to you, but you didn't know that at the time, that means you are a bona fide purchaser of that property. You bought it in good faith, not knowing or not having reason to know that you were participating in an illegal transaction. In this scenario, you were hornswoggled, but at least you could try to demonstrate to the relevant authorities that you had no intention of buying something you had no right to own and therefore shouldn't be penalized for doing so. This and other legal terms involving bona fide are based on the principle that if you do something in good faith, in a bona fide fashion, that means you aren't trying to hurt, swindle, offend, or otherwise cause harm to anyone. Watch for this theme in other senses of bona fide as well. This word is all about having your heart in the right place and being a sincere, well-intentioned person. Now, of course, having good intentions isn't enough to ensure you don't harm people or mess up somehow. There's this Peanuts comic strip that we'll post to the Facebook page where Charlie Brown is telling Lucy about doing something he regrets, but at the time he thought he was doing the right thing. And Lucy replies, I'm not quite sure how I can put this, Charlie Brown, but let me say this. In all of mankind's history, there has never been more damage done than by people who thought they were doing the right thing, unquote. This is a heavy thought, I realize, but very wise too. Doing things in good faith or having your heart in the right place is not enough to actually do good or have those things turn out well. Sad but true. Okay, switching gears, let's talk about another less sad usage note for bona fide. People sometimes use this term a little sarcastically or as an exaggeration to describe something that is specifically not a genuine example of something. So someone could say, my garden is a bona fide jungle. Everything is so overgrown. Well, overgrown it may be, but it's not a jungle, or really anywhere close to one, which means it can't be a bona fide jungle. Calling it that is just a way to add emphasis and vividness to your description. It's a lot like saying, this garden is practically a jungle. Or, to use a turn of phrase that a lot of language lovers love to hate, it's literally a jungle out there. Not all exaggerations are sarcastic, of course. Many compliments are exaggerations as well, significant ones. Usually, both the giver and the receiver of the compliment know this, and it's fine. Praise isn't held to the highest standards of journalistic accuracy. Like how people say, oh, your banana bread is to die for. Which, I sure hope not. If you're ever presented with the choice between anyone's banana bread and continuing to live, I don't think that's a close call, no matter how tasty it is. But, it's just a nice thing to say, a way to emphasize just how much you appreciate that banana bread. Now, bona fide is quite useful in these exaggerated compliment contexts. So, for example, if someone is dressed to the nines, you could say, wow, you look like a bona fide movie star. I could totally see you on the red carpet. Or, to pick another setting, you could say, wow, you keep your kitchen so organized and always have all the ingredients on hand. Cooking with you feels like I'm on a bona fide cooking show. I can't wait to meet the judges. Okay, let's close with a couple more examples of how to use this adjective form of bona fide in everyday conversation or writing. Example number 1. 6-year-old Johnny always wowed his aunts and uncles when he got dressed up in his Sunday best, a little suit complete with a tie and suspenders and even a little pocket handkerchief. Why, he's a bona fide little gentleman, they would exclaim, patting him affectionately on the head. For his part, Johnny would have preferred donning his dad's old boxing gloves and being a bona fide little featherweight champion instead. Example number 2. I think you'll really like this next house, said the real estate agent. It's a bona fide Queen Anne-style Victorian home, beautifully restored, and with more bay windows and fancy trim than you could shake a stick at. And finally, example number 3 comes from the book Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. In this selection, Alcott breaks the fourth wall by stepping out of her story and addressing the readers directly. See, the titular characters, 4 sisters, have put together a little amateur weekly newspaper, where they give themselves pseudonyms and write about various household happenings in classic newspaper style. After quoting at length from one edition of the publication, the narrator, Alcott, says this, quote, as the president finished reading the paper aloud, which, I beg leave to assure my readers, is a bona fide copy of one written by bona fide girls once upon a time, a round of applause followed, and then Mr. Snodgrass rose to make a proposition. Unquote. So Alcott is saying, look guys, I didn't just make up that pretend newspaper for this novel you're reading. It was a real pretend newspaper that real, bona fide little girls that Alcott presumably knew and may have been one of actually wrote long ago. Kind of a neat literary technique, I think. Alcott giving us a peek behind the curtain at something genuine that she incorporated into a work of fiction. And okay, I think I'm going to call it right there for part 1 of Bona Fide. We'll pick up right where we left off next time. And until then, this has been another Bona Fide episode of the Word of the Day podcast. My name is Jamie Silva. It has been my pleasure to be your host. And on behalf of all of us here at the show, thank you for listening. We hope you tune in again. And as ever, we hope you have a great